feature presentation.
Welcome back to the review event of the year, Barbenheimer. I am one of your hosts, Ken, alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he's tomato meter approved, Ken.
I thought you were going to call me the destroyer of worlds. I
No,
was like,
that too. That too.
I've been called that more than once in my life.
Oh my God. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm just, casual Ken today. Ken, pardon me. Hanging out, having a good time. We're not at the beach, unfortunately. We'll do that later. We're under a roof right now, which is odd for a couple of Kens just reviewing movies and hanging out and listening to some Matchbox 20. So there's going to be a lot to discuss on this episode, and it's going to be a fun one. I think that it's one of those episodes that both of us are coming into it very excited to talk about not only the movies, but the cultural signifier and phenomenon that is Barbenheimer.
I thought we were all going to be sick of Barbenheimer by the time these two movies came out. And you might be going, how the hell are you guys going to review this as one thing? Well, we're technically not. We're going to start off with this little kind of back and forth about Barbenheimer, how crazy it's been leading up to it, the actual experience of seeing both movies back to back. I saw them in the same day. Eric saw them 2 days, like one after another, or in the same couple days span. And I just think talking about, it's become a meme, but I think this weekend and this release has been very special, weirdly. Like, I haven't felt this way about like going to the movies and seeing other people feel this way and get dressed up and talk about it, and both movies being, I think, quite good in a long time. So it felt like this big event. So we're going to review each movie individually. We're going to talk about the experience as a whole. So if you're only interested in Oppenheimer and our thoughts on that, or Barbie and our thoughts on that, there'll be time codes that you guys can check out below. You can just click on it. If on YouTube, it'll jump right over to Oppenheimer, right over to Barbie if you want just those reviews. But I think this will be a fun episode to kind of talk about, Barbenheimer, everything leading up to it, the night of, the week of, this weekend so far. So we're recording this after both movies have released, because I decided to wait and see both movies on the same night and do the true Barbenheimer double feature. I saw Oppenheimer in IMAX 70 millimeter. Eric saw it in digital. He was supposed to see it in 70 millimeter.
I was robbed.
So we have a different experience as a whole. So I think this will kind of be fun to talk about both movies. I'm Oppenheimer up top, Barbie at the bottom. It feels like a big event, Ken. Man. It's been fun. I think me and you, we were talking about this a little bit off air leading up to this, where we were kind of like, the meme of it all became kind of exhausting to the point where you're like, and Christopher Nolan to an extent, like after Tenet and, the whole savior of cinema kind of thing during the pandemic, and kind of being that bro-y kind of cinema kind of thing. I was never thought I was like growing out of Nolan, but I was kind of being like, all right, bro, like let's chill out a little bit. And Tenet being as convoluted and all over the place as it was super disappointing. So I was a little down on Nolan. So this whole thing kind of felt like, all right, let's just kind of maybe get this over with. But then I got into the hype. I was going with my wife. I'm like, let's wear pink shirts. I like it, pink and blue shirts, and like, let's go and do this true double feature. Let's buy into the meme of it all. And then, man, I tell you, we did that double feature, and I don't know if Barbie ending with Barbie and it's kind of very positive, candy coated, like fun energy just like woke something up inside me, that like the cynicism inside me just kind of went away, and made me kind of look at this whole experience as something kind of special. Like, I know that's kind of weird to say, but like, I mean, two guys who love going to the movies, who want movie theaters to succeed, who want them to stick around forever. And we've been in this weird time where they've been up and down. We're in an actor strike and a writer strike right now, which we fully 100% support. Like, we're covering these movies still because I think they are works of art that are worth criticizing and talking about and celebrating, but we are fully in support of the actors and writers getting their due. And Barbie, I think, kind of even has a little bit of that in there, taking down corporations and capitalism and all this kind of stuff. Weirdly, it's a Barbie movie, but we'll get into that. So yeah, it's just been a wild week, man. Like, I'm kind of rambling right now, but it's felt special, and like going to the theaters and seeing people dressed up and seeing people in pink at Oppenheimer, and groups of girlfriends going to Oppenheimer and then going to see Barbie after. You see couples going, and like even if you did them 2 nights after each other, like it's really kind of boosted both films, I think, a little bit. So it's been kind of a fun week and a fun weekend so far.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned, kind of feeling burnt out about it. And I think up until the release, the closer we got, maybe the enthusiasm wasn't there as much because we had both known about this release date for so long. I think when you're in the inverse of film Twitter and film culture in general, you're kind of more exposed to this stuff in the way that anybody is within any industry. So having known this release date was coming for a little bit longer, I think, and also with the marketing, the marketing was the one thing that wasn't really hooking. I know with myself, I wasn't really interested in either one, even though I was going to see them based on the filmmakers. But watching the trailers, they didn't do much for me. And so thinking about that is like, okay, well, the week
I'm
of,
kind of with you there too.
yeah, the week of, it's going to be, even more obnoxious because it's just going to be in full force. And the studios are taking these movies and trying to sell them to as broad an audience as possible because they want to make their money back. They're a corporation. These are expensive films. They're well over $100 million each, probably closer to 200 million. And so you understand that aspect of it, but yeah, the marketing itself, I don't think was really an interest where you have to let the movie speak for itself. And that I felt very similarly with Nolan's Dunkirk, where watching
Yeah.
the marketing materials and the trailers and things like that leading up to the film, it wasn't doing much for me. But then when you watch the movie and you experience it in either 70 millimeter or on IMAX, it says all it needs to say. But I wanted to ask you, when do you think the cultural crossover happened to the mainstream? Because it does feel like there was a point where everybody became a little bit more self-aware of the
The double
Barbenheimer
feature.
thing, because
Yeah.
even to the point like this week, like Layered Butter released this really beautiful poster
Which,
that's
shout
that
out to them. We're using it as our art on this episode. So it's great. Go check out
yeah.
Layered Butter. Go check out everything they do. They put out amazing posters all the time. But yeah, that's a great question. Like I and because usually we're in this film bubble, right? You
Yeah.
mentioned film Twitter, film threads, whatever the hell, wherever you are. But we're in this bubble where we're aware of these kind of things, right? And maybe we don't give people enough credit where this can cross over, and we think it's a very niche thing, but really, I mean, Barbie, one of the it's up there with, you mentioned off air too, Super Mario came out this year, and like it's in there with that IP that everyone would recognize, right? Like no matter who you go to, you go, do you know what Barbie is? And pretty much if you're in, North America at least, you would know. And I know much of Europe knows what Barbie is, but you know what I mean? Like most people in the world is going to know what a Barbie is. Um, and I think with Oppenheimer, Chris Nolan's one of those filmmakers too that I think, most people who like movies at least would know him by name and know because of Dark Knight and at least that Batman trilogy, because that was a very huge special moment too when those movies were coming
And
out.
Inception, I would
Yeah,
say, like the
Inception
the
was a
end of
big craze
Inception,
too.
he's been
Yeah,
talking a lot about recently, where like
because
someone
that
mentioned
was another moment too.
it's his like briefcase in Pulp Fiction, right? Where everybody
Yeah,
talks about that one
and keeps
scene.
asking, and he won't give them a true answer to it because that's kind of part of it, right? So yeah, I think probably, it starts on things like Twitter and TikTok, probably. Like, I feel like it starts on Twitter and you get the film people kind of joking about it, being like, one of these studios have to move one of these, right? They can't compete against each other. But then you start going, well, in the very binary, male skewing versus female skewing content in a Warner Brothers
The David
presentation, which we term,
Zaslav of it
yeah.
all.
So, I could see both studios being like, well, it's counter programming, like the guys want to go see Oppenheimer and the ladies want to go see Barbie, which is like the
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 Dark Knight
dumbest.
and Mamma
Yeah.
Mia of
Yeah,
2008 rises
exactly.
again.
Counter programming in that binary way has been there forever. Like, a female skewing movie and a male skewing movie, they're not going to move because they don't think that they're really competing against each other. You think that, like, well, the audiences are different. Where this became such a thing, because I think one being this very dark and depressing, serious, intense biopic about one of the most important but upsetting
Controversial
controversial
figures.
figures, but things being made ever, versus this bright and fun and candy coated like a thing about a toy, about a doll. They felt so different, right? Even though they were both massive movies, that coming out on the same day felt like that perfect opposites kind of attract thing a little bit. So I feel like that,
Oppenheimers, if you will.
yeah, Oppenheimer's attract. So I feel like that started to spread a little bit. You probably got people making memes on TikTok and Twitter, and then it just became this thing where everyone's like, I can't believe these two movies are coming out on the same day. They're so different. That's funny, like a little bit. And like, and I think that just, it became, when people latch onto something and you see that people start talking about it, it snowballs, and then people go, oh, that could be really fun. People who don't go to the movies very often could be like, well, I want to see Barbie. Oh, that'll be fun to kind of do that funny double feature that people are saying about the, Chris Nolan. I saw the Batman movies, or saw Inception or something like that. They're so different. Let's do it. And I think it just kind of took over a little bit. And I do think it benefited both movies. If you're looking at the box office for both movies right now, like we're recording this on Saturday, so there's still a lot to go. But I think both movies are overperforming. Like Barbie was not supposed to, but tracking for 140, 150 million. Oppenheimer was only tracking for 40 million. And like, it looks like Oppenheimer might double that and almost do like 80 million. And then Barbie might do like 155 to 175 in there. It's hard to say because we're still early in the weekend, but I really do think sticking with these dates helped both movies. Like, I really do think that there are a lot of people doing this double feature that might not have seen one or the other movie. You know what I mean? Like, I think a lot of people going to see Barbie might not have watched Oppenheimer in the theaters, but are seeing Oppenheimer in the theaters because of that fun double feature. And I think there are lesser so, but people going to see Oppenheimer that are then going to see Barbie for the same reasons. So I really do think that it really helped Oppenheimer, I think, because I think if you look at Dunkirk and some of Nolan's more less I guess like less flashy blockbuster action movie kind of movies, like they track a little bit lower, right? Like, even though he's one of the most popular, most famous, like biggest filmmakers in the world, I still think a movie like this, a 3 hour, like slow movie, even though it's paced kind of insanely, but
Well, a
like it's
prestigious biopic being
yeah,
released in the summer movie season instead of the fall or winter, when this is the time of year that is usually reserved for blockbusters. Even in that way, you're talking about counter programming. Oppenheimer is also still counter programming in that sense, that it's it's
yeah.
it's a drama. It's historical. It's a historical drama, but it's not necessarily just historical. It's still kind of playing within the milieu of being a thriller, and unfolding as such.
And
And
still on a blockbuster scale, right? With the
yeah,
IMAX cinematography and all those kind of things. So, anyways, yeah, I think it's really helped each movie, and it's been, I saw tons of people dressed up, mostly in pink. Like it seemed like, and Barbie over like performing almost double of what Oppenheimer did. Like, it is the more, you know, I'm trying not to use the word accessible anymore, because that should attribute to something else. But like easily, people. It's what more well known. Like, more people, of all ages will go see Barbie. So of course it's doing double. So I think like that's leading the charge of people like dressing up and thinking it's a fun night out, and then less people are in suits or or all black or whatever for
or
Oppenheimer.
eating
So
oranges.
yeah, so it was fun, man. Like, there was an energy,
A
not that
Kenergy, a
Oppenheimer, a
Kenergy.
Kenergy to Thursday night when I went, that I haven't felt since probably Avengers Endgame. And I know that wasn't that long ago, but I remember us frequently getting this when movies were a little bit more spread out, and I'm thinking in that Dark Knight era, which is quite a while ago now. Like it felt like there was an event film every few months, right? And now when we've become a little bit oversaturated and of getting and spoiled a little bit of getting like a quote unquote blockbuster or big movie every week almost, and to you know varying degrees of enjoyment and quality and things like that. Like they haven't, like, I guess Spider-Verse was close to that. Like that's something that caught on and it did a lot better than the first movie and things like that. But I
This is
yeah.
the last time I felt that
Yeah,
what you're
because
describing
I
it.
think for film people, yes. I'm not trying to diminish Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, because I
I was
agree
gonna
with
say
that.
Once Upon Atomic
Um,
Time.
I do agree with that, Eric, but I think that that's a little bit more of, that bubble we're talking about. Like
Right.
that's when you felt that. But what
But
I'm
there was a
talking
lot. But
about
Tarantino, I think, is one of those people though as well that he sells. His name is enough to sell a ticket. People know
totally,
who
but I
he is,
don't
and
think
there's an
it's on the same
excitement.
level as this weekend.
No, this
I
is this
don't
is this is a cult. I'm talking about like this is a cultural phenomenon. But in
yeah.
terms of like getting like I'm looking at Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is more so like closer to Oppenheimer, where you have
Mhm.
a film that isn't necessarily a summer blockbuster per se, but it's getting a big profile summer release. And this was also Tarantino, selling this to Sony at a time where he was, leaving the problematic era of working with the Weinsteins and
It's the same
finding a
kind of
new
situation as
place.
Nolan leaving Warner Brothers too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and it feels
And
like that in some ways. Like even
and
watching it in
Nolan
70 millimeter at Varsity with you, like
Nolan owes Tarantino a little bit, because
yeah,
Tarantino was that guy who forced everyone to put 70 millimeter projectors back in their cinemas, and then Nolan's done a lot for IMAX. So I guess that's a good, unless you had anything about the double feature thing. I mean, I
yeah.
talked
I
a
just
lot.
wanted to quickly mention, like with the double feature of it all, I saw Barbie on Monday, and then I saw Oppenheimer on Wednesday. But I think thematically, what's interesting, even though they're very different movies, they're both moral quandaries and
Yeah,
existential dilemmas within the narrative that they're telling and the narrative that they're showing you, and I think that that's kind of interesting as well. Like, and they're both, I think they're films, like if you really love them, you can go back and get so much more on a second or third watch, because they're so densely kind of impacted with all this really good and interesting stuff that I think on a first time watch, you're just taking in the experience. Where I'm really excited to go back and watch Barbie. And even though I'm more mixed positive and with some caveats on Oppenheimer, I do feel I would maybe get more on a second viewing of it, because I
I
remember
agree.
I remember my experience with Interstellar almost feeling very similar to this, where the first time I saw Interstellar, I liked the film quite a bit, but there was still some things that are holding me back. And we'll talk about it with what's kind of bothering me with Oppenheimer. But with Interstellar, then rewatching it a few years down the line, I found myself loving it even more. And I almost do feel like it is the closest thing to being a personal and emotional film from Christopher Nolan, who's somebody who's known for being very cold and clinical and,
Yeah.
and calculated in his mythology and his methods as a filmmaker.
Yeah, I totally agree that that weirdly the movies work well as a double feature because of some of those things that you mentioned, and it almost just worked out perfectly. And the comparison to Interstellar is interesting, because I was talking about this with my wife last night too, and I felt very, I really like Oppenheimer, I think a little bit more than you, but I still think in the grand scheme of things, I prefer more sci-fi action-y Nolan stuff, although Tenet removed. But like, I it did remind me of Interstellar in the sense where I was very tepid on Interstellar, or thought it was, good, not great when I first saw it. But that's a movie where each time I watch it, I like it more. And it kind of slowly rises up for me. And then if you're ranking Nolan movies, and like the experience of that in IMAX, like each time I see it, the first not first, just Interstellar, is, I think, super like it is an experience, and Oppenheimer too is as well. So I guess we can kind of move into that, because like before we kind of review both movies, um I can talk a little bit about how it was seeing the film um, in IMAX 70 millimeters. So you were supposed to see the film on regular 70 millimeter at Varsity.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the print didn't get there in time, is
So it was a
what they
DCP.
said to you guys. Although I also heard reports that their projectionist might have quit at Varsity, so that's why like it didn't work properly on the first night as well. There's a lot of stuff, so we can kind of talk about all of that here. So, you know, I think you can tell by both of us, we both enjoyed both movies to various extents. We both love Barbie. I thought Oppenheimer was quite good. Eric thought it was, you know, mixed positive on Oppenheimer. So there's our, you know, opinions on that. Full reviews coming up. Time codes, like I said. Let us know which movie you guys did first in the comments and stuff like that. I would love to know which way you guys think is the
You'd like
proper
to
way of watching
Nolan
them.
which films you saw first.
Ew. So anyways, the 70 mil. So yeah, I went to Cineplex Vaughan here in Toronto. So there's only like 30 cinemas worldwide that are playing it on IMAX 70 millimeter or are capable of it. Two of them are in the GTA, none in downtown Toronto because they took the 70 millimeter from Scotiabank. So it's only a laser IMAX, which is still full frame, but it is digital. So it's still a good experience at Scotiabank. Usually, I haven't seen Oppenheimer there, but it is digital. So Cineplex Vaughan, Cineplex Mississauga are the two theaters near us that are playing it in IMAX 70 millimeter. Varsity Cinemas is playing it in regular 70 millimeter.
And Scotia's playing it in laser, like it's
That's what I
digital.
just mentioned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then usually we would have had the Cinesphere, which can play IMAX 70 millimeter as well, but it is closed right now because it's being renovated again. And there's a giant shit show down at Ontario Place where the Cinesphere is, which is the first ever permanent IMAX theater. Very awesome place to see IMAX movies. Anyways, that's a little history of the GTA IMAX theater. So I went to Vaughan. First showing of it, 6 p.m. Very first showing in IMAX 70 millimeter. It felt like TIFF a little bit, Eric, because like seeing the double feature of Barbie and Oppenheimer, and I ran into our friend Shaq, Mark Weingust of Layered Butter. There was Patrick Tomaso was there and went viral because of showing a video of when the show broke down halfway through. Not broke down, but stopped and then restarted. So there's a lot of people there that like I knew, and you bump into people, you're saying hi. Shaq's seat was actually right beside ours just by like not even on purpose. He's like, "Where are you sitting?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm J26." He's like, "Oh, I'm J25." I was like, "Amazing." So sat with Shaq, watched the movie. Um so uh, the, and you brought up Tarantino and Nolan's in this camp too, because they're two of the only guys that are like
Well, they're film
still,
bro
yeah,
directors too.
that's one thing. Two, they're, I think they get a little bit of that because they are those guys that are so hardcore when it comes to shooting on film, and not only just shooting on film, but making sure places project on film, which they're two of the only guys that still like will go, I'm not making a movie unless it's at least projected on film in a handful of spots. So
PTA
it,
as well is in there.
yeah, he does. Yes,
Yeah.
you're right there. But maybe not to the extent as those two guys. I think. Like I think he gets like It's yeah. You're right. You're right.
He's there. I think all three of those guys are traditionalists, where
Yeah.
like they're the ones that are keeping photochemical film
Yeah.
and tech alive, where if it wasn't for those bigger names, maybe it would be a rarity. Not to say that there aren't other filmmakers that are using it, because there are, but in terms of just, you know, shooting on film, and Nolan in particular shooting
I think actually
on,
projecting and getting a
yeah, shooting on, I think with Nolan in particular, like he's been talking very much about using, you know, the black and white analog IMAX film for this, and it being
which they
kind
had
of
to
a
invent for
rarity.
this. Yeah.
Exactly. And so you
Yeah.
have things like that where that is a selling point to not only people that are interested in the technical side of film, but the puritans of cinema, the ones that
Yeah.
will go to a movie because they want to see the texture on screen. They want to
And you
feel
get
like
that,
it's
man.
projecting that way back to them.
And there's not many people who do that, and we just mentioned the few. So it does feel like an experience. Like every time I go into one of those IMAX theaters to see a Nolan movie on 70 millimeter, and we were kind of robbed of that of Tenet, right? Because we did go see Tenet in Whitby on digital on a regular 239 CinemaScope kind of widescreen, and I've never seen it in IMAX. So maybe that would, I saw the opening in IMAX at Cinesphere when they did that little preview. Um, so maybe I do think it enhances his movies. It makes them feel like more of an experience. There is no one else kind of, we did have Jordan Peele shoot on IMAX film, but it was never projected on IMAX film with
Which
Nope.
was also Hoyt van
Um,
Hoytema as the
yeah.
cinematographer.
So obviously I think that was intentional there. Um, and it does so without getting into the movie, which we will do in a moment, but the whole experience of it was great. I mean, mind you, it did shut down 2 hours and 20 minutes into the movie. Like, it just stopped the first minute or so. There was nothing on screen, so it started and we could hear it, but we never saw the or not Universal logo, or Sin Copy
Yeah.
is it, yeah, Sin Copy logo or anything like that. It finally realized that there was nothing on screen, and they turned it on when that quote comes up at the very beginning in the fire. um so we missed a bit of the beginning, and then missed a little bit when it shut down. So that being said, there's still nothing like it. Like, you don't get this very often, other than maybe a PTA or a Tarantino when those movies come out. And Warner Brothers used to weirdly do it with their big movies. They would play them in 70 millimeter at Varsity. Like,
Ready
I
Player
saw
One.
I saw Ready Player One in 70 mil. I saw Wonder Woman in 70 mil. I saw Fantastic Beasts in 70 mil. Like, every big
Well, Inherent
uh
Vice was a 70
um
millimeter film as
yeah,
well, talking about
and
Paul Thomas Anderson.
yeah, and none of those movies were really even shot on that, but like Warner Brothers was weirdly printing these and sending them out to Varsity to do that. So I don't know. It's like you said, there's something about the flickering light and the texture. And like, I'm not a purist when it comes to movies. Like, I'm fine watching stuff on digital. I think film has gotten uglier with digital cinematography, but there are people who can do it super well.
Well, that
And
I think that's
and
the difference, though. I think that's
yeah.
important to make that distinction. It's not that digital doesn't necessarily look bad. It's who's using it and how they use it, because I think it's
Yeah,
still
I think
a
people have just gotten
younger
a little
art
lazy,
form.
and
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
and like there are people who know how to utilize it very, very well. There are people who know how to make it look like film, but there's still something about seeing that like flickering light and those flesh tones and like the texture you're mentioning. And like, I am someone who likes when it's a little, like, you see a scratch or a hair on the print, or there is this kind of weird fluttering, which you can kind of do a perfect film print and project it perfectly, but sometimes it's those imperfections that kind of add to the experience, especially with a movie like Oppenheimer as well. So like, did Oppenheimer need to be in IMAX? I don't know. Like, it's a lot of, it's a drama. It's a historical drama and biopic. Like, it's just, there's a lot of people talking in IMAX, or it does the classic Nolan thing of like cutting between the 239 footage and the IMAX footage, just like what feels like randomly. Like, it's not. And that's the thing that's always kind of annoyed me about his IMAX movies, is like, I'd prefer there to be like a big chunk in IMAX, or the whole thing in IMAX, rather than like a scene where someone's driving up to a house, and then when they're leaving the car and walking up to the house, it's in IMAX, but it's like a 4 frames, and then it cuts back to the 239 footage. And I'm like, why did that shot of the person getting out of the car need to be in IMAX? Like,
You
I
want more intention, right? Like a
yeah, like,
reason why he's doing
and
that.
it almost seems like, well, the scenes where we need like they're very dialogue heavy and in close up, because the cameras are so loud, we can't necessarily shoot that on IMAX. But anything where we need a wide, we'll shoot it on IMAX. But sometimes I don't think it's necessary, and like, I get that you're just going to crop it for the 239 anyway, so you're like, well, we're framing everything and we're blocking everything for the wide, right? So whatever, throw the IMAX frame in there because we shot it on that. But it, for consistency reasons, that's the shit that always kind of is distracting towards me. And I did find that through Oppenheimer, where I'm like, I'd rather big sequences be consistently in IMAX rather than this intercutting of like throwing in a establishing shot in IMAX. Other than like, he's done establishing shots of a cityscape or something, like, I'm kind of fine like leading into a scene, but when you're intercutting them in a scene, it always feels distracting to me. And I felt that way watching Oppenheimer. That being said, still gorgeous, still like the more surreal moments of the movie I think work really well. Obviously the atom bomb test,
The Trinity test,
the
yeah.
Trinity test was fully in IMAX and was incredible. Um, the black and white cinematography really interesting to see in IMAX. Should I do think if you have this available to you, because there's only 30 of them in the whole world, so it is very rare to be able to do this. You should go see it in 30 millimeter, 70 millimeter IMAX, even with the distracting intercutting between the footage and things like that. Like it is gorgeous. It is like seeing just people's faces in this gigantic IMAX cinematography and the pacing of the movie. And Nolan is so good at that kind of stuff that like even something that should be very dry just feels like it has this intense, like incredible pacing to it all, that like he's just in every movie, he's just, for better or for worse, like uh it's wild to watch sometimes. So all of his movies do have this intensity to them, and that is enhanced by the IMAX stuff. So overall, yeah, I do think you should go see it in IMAX, because like he is one of the only guys who is a master of that format, I think.
And can afford it. I think like if
Yeah,
it wasn't because of the movies that he's made previously, the Dark Knight trilogy, Inception,
yeah,
Dunkirk, Interstellar, um, if it was him just coming off of Insomnia, he wouldn't be able to get
yeah.
these kind of movies made. But because
No,
he's earned that in the last almost, I think, 2 decades now as a filmmaker, he's able to champion this very rare experience that again, I think you are making a really good point about, if you live close to one of these theaters, support the theater as well,
yeah.
because you don't want to lose something that is such a rarefied thing already.
Where you don't want
And
them to be like, it's not worth the hassle, right?
yeah, we're
Like,
going to turn it into some condos or something.
yeah, or even just studios going, well, is it really worth printing these film prints and things like that if not enough people are going to them? But like I do think there are enough of us, whether it's those people in that bubble who really do care about that stuff, um and then it being this kind of event kind of thing, because movies are mostly shown on digital. I think even some people outside of that bubble are going, oh, I've heard it's projected on film, we should go see it like that, because we don't really get that much anymore. I mean, the technical issues that we've heard about this weekend, not great, but that's what you get when you kill a format and try to bring it back once every 5 years and
Like
don't
the
have people.
podcast.
Yeah. Like, yeah, yeah. Like, when you don't have people properly trained, like I heard, I don't know if it's true, that they had to fly in someone from IMAX in California to run the IMAX prints in Mississauga and Vaughan,
Oh wow.
because they don't have anyone trained to run such a, like, it's a crazy print, like it is humongous, and those projectors are hard to run, and if you don't have people that know how to use those IMAX film projectors, you had to bring in people to do that. And then regular film projectors, there's still not that many people that are able to kind of do that. Like I worked at a movie theater at the tail end of film and the beginning of digital. I was at the Oshawa Cineplex when they were getting rid of all their film projectors and putting in digital. So I was still able to get there, and they would train normal teenagers to just run the film projectors, right? But now I just feel like that's why you're getting so many issues at all of these screenings, which I would just say be patient and understand that that's part of it. Like, would I wish that Cineplex would be better at this stuff? Yes.
That's a whole
Or
other
plan
can of
better for
worms
it.
though, right?
Yeah.
Where Cineplex, I
So
think, like,
yeah.
they could do
Should
better. They
this have
could
been
treat
at
their
TIFF?
employees
Yes.
better. Yes. Well, because I'm just looking at this now. So the IMAX film print is 11 miles long and it
Yeah.
weighs 600 pounds.
They
So
had
you
to
can
build a
only,
new platter for it because it was so
yeah.
big. Because the maximum was 2.5 hours, which is why um, a lot of Nolan's other movies were right on the dot at 2:30, and then he got them to extend it to 2:45, and now he got them to extend it to 3 hours. So, and he's like, I think this is as high as it can possibly go if you want a movie on film in IMAX. So, that's the experience of seeing it in 70 millimeter. Do I think it's worth it? I absolutely do think if you have it near you, I think it's like a 2 week engagement that they're doing with the IMAX film of it. So if you have an opportunity to do it, and you're remotely interested, or you already saw the movie in digital or something like that, I still think it's worth, if you can handle it a second time or are interested in it a second time, to go see it in IMAX film. And second best to that, I would say try to see it in 70 millimeter film. Third best, IMAX laser. And then, or IMAX laser, I still think is going to be a good experience. So, I
Fourth,
just,
on your iPhone or iWatch.
yeah, the way it was intended. Someone said you should watch Barbie and Oppenheimer on a Nintendo DS and have it on the screen. Like,
Now, another
like
thing I'm
thing.
very
So
curious about, talking about July specifically, and we'll never really know probably the answer to this. I wonder how Tom Cruise is going to see Oppenheimer, just because of Oppenheimer being the movie that
with
kicked.
popcorn for sure.
Definitely, always with popcorns and movies. Love them both.
Do we honestly think he goes to the movies all the time?
No,
Or
I don't think
no?
he ever goes. I don't think he
Yeah.
eats popcorn.
Yeah. I
think
said like
it's
those are the first three kernels of popcorn he's ever
he's
had in
ever
his
eaten.
life.
Yeah, the popcorn from Cineplex, the CGI popcorn.
Yeah.
But no, that's gonna. I think that would be interesting as well to know if he did go and see Oppenheimer in IMAX, just because of Mission Impossible being kicked out of IMAX for Oppenheimer, and there being a little bit of resentment there on Cruise and Macquarie's part of that movie not having more time in that format and seeing it in that
Yeah.
way. So I think that would be interesting as well. Just in terms of like how if he did watch them. I'm sure he does watch movies. I just think he's more of a casual movie goer, and he's also weirdly probably the actual savior of cinema because of Top Gun Maverick, more so than Nolan was with Tenet. So
Hey, but Greta Gerwig with Barbie right now too.
yeah.
Like I feel like
She's not the savior. She's like the messiah of cinema.
yeah, I love it.
You know?
All right, so that's kind of gonna wrap up our like experience of Barbenheimer as that double feature in IMAX 70 millimeter. How did the digital look, Eric? Like it looked
It looked
okay.
fine.
Yeah.
It looked fine. It had kind of a faux film texture to it, and
Yeah.
seeing it in the only thing I didn't like about it, and this is just the layout of Varsity, and it's not necessarily Varsity's fault per se. It's
Varsity
just
8, right?
Varsity
Yeah.
8. It's that
Yeah.
you have the sort of the is it
The
down,
old school kind of it's not
downcline, like,
stadium seating, it's like a classic slope seating kind of
yeah,
thing, right?
so
Yeah.
it's almost like playing a game of Russian roulette in a way, because you never know who's
You
going to
don't
sit in
want like
front
a
of you,
giant
right?
to sit in front of you. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I get
exactly.
that.
So I was lucky there where Kyle, who took the bullet for me, somebody did sit in front of me that was much taller, but he was like, I'll switch with you because you need to see this for review. So I just wanted to say
Right.
thank you to Kyle for that. And my experience with watching Barbie, I saw it at a promo screening at Scotiabank Theater, which also is Theater 8, weirdly enough. Was not, it's not the best theater, but I think watching it with both film critics and influencers did something in a way that was kind of even more joyful than I was expecting it to be, because the people that were watching it were also, cosplaying, dressing up in pink, and completely immersed in the experience.
Yeah.
And that, on top of it being a great movie, truly, I think, makes for one of the best experiences going to the cinema this year, and such one to cherish. So yeah, I think, like, again, maybe before we go into the reviews, maybe we should talk quickly about like what you would recommend, like what film you should see first.
Yeah, I love that. I I personally, maybe it's because of the way I saw it. Um I love Oppenheimer first, Barbie second. And I think that because I just prefer the like Oppenheimer is this, intense and depressing kind of movie, especially like the end of it and just where, the state of the world. And I mean, Barbie handles a lot of that kind of stuff too, but in a much different way. So that's why I do think that they are a great double feature. But the kind of emotionally taxing nature of Oppenheimer and its subject matter and where it leaves you, I think it was very welcoming to go into Barbie afterwards, even though I was emotionally exhausted from Oppenheimer, and then be kind of woken up again, right? Like, not that I was sleepy or anything, but like, Barbie is so joyful and energetic and funny, and still has great social commentary, um and is impactful and emotional. But like, I think ending on that was, I think, the preferred way for me. Like, I think ending on that high and that fun energy of Barbie, I think is a great way to have both of those movies, because still think you can be emotionally devastated or in both films, but from Oppenheimer especially, like, you do need time. Like, I only had a 40-minute gap in between the two movies, which might be quite short, and it is kind of a whiplash double feature where you're like, they couldn't be opposite in their tones and
Aesthetic.
color palettes and aesthetic and stuff like that. But um, very happy I did them on the same night, and I think Oppenheimer first, Barbie second. However, that's if you're seeing them like on the same day. I have slightly different opinion if you're going, I'm only going to go see one this weekend. I'd personally say it depends what mood you're in, but I think Barbie with a full crowd, to Eric's point that he just mentioned, with people who are very into the movie, who are dressing up, who are there to have a good time, who are there to laugh. Like, Barbie is a comedy, and I think comedies, much like horror movies, are enhanced with a large crowd. I think you could watch Oppenheimer in an empty IMAX cinema by yourself and have the same experience as if it was packed, where Barbie, I think, with a full crowd, will be much more enjoyable than watching Barbie alone like 3 weeks later. Like, and I still think Barbie is a very good movie, and it's still worth seeing alone 3 weeks later. I just think that Barbie is enhanced by that um
Communal
yeah,
experience.
communal experience. So I think, like, if you're choosing one, just go see Barbie. You can see Oppenheimer later and have that same experience. If you only want to go to the movies once, if you're doing them in the same day, Oppenheimer first, Barbie second, because you're going to see both movies anyway, and it's going to be busy at both movies anyway. So that's my 2 cents. Eric, what about you?
You know, I don't disagree with you in if you're doing it on the same day. But there is something about the way that I saw it that is the influence of why I'm recommending Barbie first, because I feel and this is also because of my review, which we'll be getting into in a little bit. I think Barbie is the better movie,
I agree.
just by and not even comparing them in terms of like
It's hard to
themes of
compare them. Yeah.
existentialism and things like that, but more so with the feeling that it gives you after watching it. I feel like if you're watching Oppenheimer first and then you're going into Barbie second, and you only have, say, 40 minutes or even less time than that to digest, Oppenheimer is such a weighty movie that not, and again, Barbie is as well, but it's so depressing
Yeah.
that there is something a little bit more um there's a pick me up about Barbie that feels like when you're watching it and where it ends, that it's okay to have these thoughts and considerations about life and be depressed, but also, want to dismantle the patriarchy and things like that. But there is a not necessarily an overly positive message to the end, but one that it's assuring that we can keep going on, that we can keep
Being
moving
human.
on
Yeah.
as a human being, where the end of
Oppenheimer's pretty
Oppenheimer,
nihilistic. Yeah. Like,
yeah, and
yeah,
and and
like,
it, and it leaves you in a place where it's like, yeah, he was able to, you know, do what he had to and explain his side of the story and, you know, move on, but that guilt that he's racked with as a person for potentially being responsible for the deaths of millions, thousands of people is something that it holds a lot more weight there. And because it is a historical biopic, I think you're going to kind of be almost entrenched with that a little bit more than you are with Barbie, where Barbie, again, that feeling of coming out of that euphoria, that pleasantness, that feeling of like you saw something that is both cinematically satisfying but also very smart with how it's
Yeah.
handling its approach to IP and product placement. And we've seen a lot of that. You alluded to it already, but we've seen that with not only Super Mario Brothers and Dungeons and Dragons, but even with Air and Blackberry and Flamin' Hot, all these movies that even Spider Verse, that are that have that kind of double edged sword of trying to market these movies as popcorn entertainment that have a little bit more to them based on the prestigious nature behind them, the directors, the writing, the cast. But there still is, okay, well, is this movie kind of selling you on these things still to buy them after the fact?
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into, all right, our opinions. We think both movies are worth seeing. That was mostly spoiler free, but we're going to get into reviews of both films, which will be complete with spoilers. The movies are out now. You should go see both. If you haven't yet, come back and then you can kind of hear us discuss both movies. Eric, what do you want to start with?
Oh,
That's the
I mean, we kind of,
question.
that's a perfect, that's a,
Like,
like, where
yeah,
do,
so
what
like,
do reviewers start with?
yeah, like I don't think many people are going to separate this, but we thought like this was a fun thing. Like a lot of people have their reviews out for both movies already. This is kind of, I think, an interesting way to do a podcast review of this movie because you're talking about them as that double feature, but we will review them individually. I say we start, huh, huh. Um, let's start with Barbie because I
Okay.
think we both are very enthusiastic about that movie. And I think, Oppenheimer will be a good conversation as well. But I think we both really, really loved Barbie, and which is a wild thing to say. And let's start there. So we are going to begin our review of Barbie. If you haven't seen it, we're spoiling the shit out of it. Please go see it. I think it's definitely worth your time. All right, we've kind of gone over both movies, but I'll kick it off too, and we've both kind of alluded to this, but I am amazed by this movie. I think it is uh, a masterpiece, and I think it's the best use of IP I've seen in a quite long time. I tweeted this, so if you follow me or hearing me repeat myself, but like as this Trojan horse to get a studio to give you $150 million to make this, you know, movie that includes this very feminist movie about this how it is to be a woman and to be human and to just having wonderful social commentary, but it's also very, very funny. It's one of the funniest movies of the year, if not the funniest, one of the best comedies I've seen in a long time. But then Greta Gerwig just showing that she is one of the best working directors today of um, injecting this energy and this zest for life and to be a woman and to it was just, I couldn't believe what I was watching. It is unhinged in the best ways, where at every moment it's just like what you're watching on screen is just like I had to like close my eyes and blink multiple times because I'm like, what the fuck is happening in a good way. um like it's very easy to follow, but like just what you're seeing on screen, you almost can't believe works as well as it does, because it did remind me of, obviously the Lego movie and things like that. There's many other movies you're going to reference, but of recent, of taking a toy and making it more than, and actually having something to say and making it very clever and very funny. So is the easiest reference. You'll get into some more of the deep cuts and film references and things like that. But, I just think its production design is impeccable, is amazing. Its costumes are amazing. The soundtrack is banging. The original song, Ryan Gosling is a wonder. Margot Robbie is incredible. It's just so well put together. And as both just this kind of popcorn entertainment, but then if you look deeper, there is this emotional core to the movie that I think is so strong that you would have never guessed is in a Barbie movie. Like when it's just one of those things when you're like, oh my God, they're making a Barbie movie. What the hell's that going to be? And you're like, okay, these people are attached. That doesn't sound great. Okay, they dropped out. And you're like, Greta Gerwig and directing and Noah Baumbach co-writing with her. You're like, that could be something, or could it just be like a movie about a toy and she's cashing out and making a buck, but she's able to um use that in the best way where yes it's cashing out, yes it's doing a big blockbuster, yes it's doing this big IP that like much in the vein of a Marvel or a Star Wars or something like that of like selling out. But this is the best way of selling out, is like keeping what makes you you and what makes your movies special and injecting it into this Trojan horse to convince $160 million worth of tickets to be sold for people to think they're seeing a movie about a toy, but there's so much more to it. And like, I just fucking love this movie and I can't wait to get into it more, but those are my quick thoughts.
Matt, this movie is absolutely sublime.
It's so good.
It's an incredible to watch. And I also used the descriptor Trojan horse in my Rogers
cool.
review
I didn't know
because
that. I wrote that before I saw that.
Yeah. So, and I wrote that before that, but I'm sure there's a lot of people that have that
Oh, yeah,
similar
it's
feeling of,
not like that.
taking IP and product and, filling
Tricking
up
people.
a Barbie dream house with, existential
Existentialism
quandaries
and-
about
yeah.
life and sort of the breakdown of it. Yeah, you're watching this and it keeps evolving and changing over the course of the movie. And at first when you're presented with it, with the Lizzo song coming in and how that's kind of meta and, singing a song that's literally, basically telling you what's happening, but it also the music itself sounds like something out of an 80s movie, something like Adventures in Babysitting.
Yeah.
It has that kind of quality to it. And then you mentioned the production design, the artificial kind of quality of the sets and the pastels and the exterior being, completely fake, but the way that Gerwig as a director and as a co-writer injects not only authenticity but emotion into the story and into these very kind of fake looking structures is similar to films that she's been referencing over the course of these press junkets. You look at French New Wave filmmaker Jacques Demy, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg specifically, that has had an influence not only on her recently, but Damien Chazelle for La La Land. He talked a lot about
Yeah.
it. Barry Jenkins talked about that for If Beale Street Could Talk, and he also talked about In the Mood for Love, which I think in Wong Kar-wai's movie also took a lot from The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. So you're seeing a lot of these American filmmakers coming in and taking French influences from the 1950s, and those French influences from the 1950s were taking their influences from 1930s Americana. So it's this weird cycle, that's happening. And then moving a little further away from the 1950s, because Jacques Tati didn't fit into that criteria. But Playtime is one of those movies that uses its sets as a way to choreograph almost dance numbers. You watch a sequence in the Mattel building where Barbie is escaping from Will Ferrell's Mattel CEO, and the way that people are moving in and out of the scene is right out of Playtime. It's like just the movement of human bodies in a unassuming kind of corporate office, but the symmetry of it all is fantastic. This would also weirdly make a great double bill, not just because Margot Robbie's in both and they're two of the best films of the year, but even like looking at Wes Anderson. Wes
Yeah.
Anderson's a guy that's been using kind of artifice more and more as he moves on. And it's kind of been a year, I think, of, finding human frailty and fragility, blonde fragility, in the facade of kind of a fake exterior. Even Beau is Afraid, I think, is a movie
I
that
thought of that too while
dealt
watching
with
it.
it. And So you're watching that and you're thinking to yourself, oh, okay, like, and another filmmaking duo that Scorsese's been a big fan of. I mean, since the beginning with Powell and Pressburger, A Matter of Life and Death is one of those movies where it's like you choose to, live again, and to live a different way, or to live a way that isn't what you're being told to, and to have that second chance to come back and make your own way about the world. And Margot Robbie's characters, her, where her arc goes isn't dissimilar to David Niven, or even, someone, and I can't believe I'm I'm gonna partly it's a remake, but you look at Wings of Desire, or the remake of it, City of Angels, with Nick Cage, Bruno Ganz and Nick Cage's character, where it's like, do you want to live among the people as a human being? And that conversation is very similar to those movies, and that being a reference point. But then, if you're looking at it from the point of view of being a meta movie lover, this is almost, this could have been if Barbie wasn't such a brand name title, they could have renamed this movie to Last Action Figure, in the way that Last Action Hero
Yeah.
kind of feels almost like a kin. I would love to do a double feature of those two movies, because you have, America Ferrera and Ariana Greenblatt as a mother daughter, and that's an interesting storyline in itself. But the daughter being more cynical and kind of frustrated with the gender stereotype, and sort of the roadblock that Barbie has become to women and young girls. And so when you're watching those scenes, you're kind of reminded of a reverse version of Schwarzenegger and the kid from Last Action Hero. But on top of that, Ken's trajectory is actually very similar to Charles Dance in that movie, where Charles Dance's character comes into the real world, and in the real world, he can get away with murder. And in his own movie universe, he can't get away with those things without the police chasing him. And so he brings his world into the real world, where it's also the reverse version of Ken being corrupted in our world by the patriarchy and
It's amazing.
and what it is to be a man. And he takes that and brings it back into his world and creates cancel culture, basically, in Woodstock 99. So there's so much going on with just those incredible references alone. But on top of that, Gerwig knows how to cut a great comedic scene. The reaction shots in particular, the compositions are beautiful, the emotions are so strong. I think this is Robbie's best performance, and the way that, again, that City of Angels, Wings of Desire thing, of the more time she spends in the real world, she's becoming more human and realizing that there's so much complexity in the world that it's hard to kind of distill it into just saying these platitudes of being, oh, well, Barbie is now something, Barbie Land is a progressive place. It's a place that, but it's not. And that's the thing that's also interesting, because what I don't understand is how anybody could watch this movie and say that it's anti-men.
No,
When it's
if you
not.
get to the end of it, it's not really. It's not
saying
at all.
that the way that Barbie Land is
also not the right
portraying
way.
Ken's,
that
Ken should be his own man, his own person,
and not just and Ken.
And yes, Gosling is on another level here. He's always he's the best Ryan when it comes to Canada's exports, but he's always been one of those guys that's been great in everything, but he's always been played in one way or another, comedic or dramatic. He is such an amazing comedic talent. Just certain expressions, physical gestures are incredible. As a dramatic actor, he makes you feel incredibly moved by his performances. But no filmmaker has utilized both in the same movie up until now. I think Greta Gerwig uses both, and even in the same scene, where you feel incredibly sorry for the man, or the plastic man,
the toy,
the toy, but at the same time, you understand where the character is learning sort of these bad behaviors. And I think that's another really important thing about this movie, and Gerwig understands this throughout the entire movie, is that Barbie Land and the way that these characters are interpreting the real world is through the eyes of a child, because
I
it's
know,
it's
that's what I
children
yeah.
it's children playing with action figures, and how children interpret the world is how these action figures interpret the world. And
Yep.
so it never forgets this. This is basically the best live action Pixar movie that Pixar has never made.
You nailed it. And I mean, Pixar already did Barbie and Ken very, very well in Toy
Michael
Story
Keaton
3. And Michael
and Jodie
Keaton's amazing.
Benson, yeah.
Yeah, they're amazing. But I agree with every point you've made. Like the way that, you know, Barbie going into the real world and then having to defeat the patriarchy now in Barbie Land, and then having Ken, who, you know, represents how young men are corrupted by the world that they live in, and you know, fall in line with the patriarchy and feel accepted and important because of it, and how that can kind of, as they get older and see more of the world, want to just kind of fall into that because uh it is perfect. And then that coming back to Barbie Land, and then having it represent, you know, women in general having to take down the patriarchy, or at least deal with the patriarchy. Like it just perfectly captures, and it's such a simple and obvious kind of juxtaposition between, you know, trying to portray this, you know, real world versus, you know, utilizing this fake Barbie world and representing our world, and what it is to be human and be a woman, but using toys to represent all of that. Like it's it goes so much deeper than surface level, even though at its core it's a very simple kind of concept. And like, yeah, there are like Ryan Gosling, man, like it's just every fucking moment is so funny. You brought up William Zabka in Cobra Kai, and he's playing that.
Young William Zabka in
Yeah,
particular, when anytime William Zabka wears a headband
yeah, it's
and that
perfect.
platinum blonde hair, and there's certain
It's
expressions that
It's that
Gosling
himbo,
has.
perfect
Yeah.
himbo kind of performance, right? But then there's quieter moments from Robbie where I just wasn't expecting in this movie. There's that moment at the bus stop with the older woman that has been brought up a lot in articles lately, of how that's the one scene Mattel wanted to cut, and they fought for it. And it's such a beautiful, quiet, human moment. It's really the first moment Barbie is feeling truly human, right? Where she sees, you know, you can age gracefully and be beautiful in old age, and it doesn't have to be this perfect, like, you know, I stay the same my whole life. I'm skinny and beautiful and you know, and young and things like that. Like the first moment she sees this woman, it's such a quiet, wonderful moment. And then you get that throughout the movie, where in between these ridiculous fucking scenes that are just absurd and unhinged and hilarious, you get these like quiet human moments from Robbie, or from America Ferrera's character and her daughter, um and like you get these montages of families and life and women, and just like that's the kind of stuff I wasn't expecting throughout the movie. And Gerwig, just like you said, it knows how to perfectly place those moments in between an eccentric crazy dance music number from Ken or whatever, right? Like, or like the you know, or this zany kind of Mattel office building scene where, you know, Will Ferrell, again, the Lego movie comparisons, he's
Well,
essentially
Elf too,
an elf. Yeah,
because
like
he was Barbie in Elf,
yeah,
like coming into the
essentially.
real world as a
um
fish out of water comedy.
and just that, you know, that scene in the boardroom in Mattel, and that chase sequence, like it plays off in this artificial but human way, and that, like, that sounds like it shouldn't work, but like it just, every scene I kept going, this shouldn't work. Like there should be something
How is
here
this
where I'm like,
working?
yeah, like every sequence, because there's just this layer of artifice on it, but then this like deep human connection you feel throughout this whole movie, where like nothing feels real. Like even the stuff in the real world, other than like some of those moments, doesn't feel like you're in the real world, but like the absurdity of it like then connects you in some way to it. It's just it's wild, like just the way this I just kept laughing at even like any of the Will Ferrell moments of like, it happened again. Like, and then them
Skippy,
describing them
Skippy,
Skipper, yeah.
Skipper. Pardon me.
And then like, it's just like the absurdity of the real world matching Barbie land and just like point and using that to point out the absurdity and how we are in the real world by making it as artificial as Barbie land of being like, what the fuck is this, like this world that we live in, like, and we need to fix this shit, and women have been treated so poorly, and like, um
Well,
and
even
I
men, again,
and
even
men
men
too,
are being led down
being,
this road
yes.
of thinking you have to look like Sylvester Stallone in a Rocky
No,
poster.
it's a very feminist movie, but I agree that it's not a man-hating movie at all.
No.
Like, I think it takes a lot of shots at men deservingly, like,
Yeah.
and they're very funny and they're poignant and they're perfect. But like, and me, like, I
We
think
had a
like
woman
unless you're
CEO once.
if you're very insecure as a man, you might get offended at some of it. But if you even look at the end of it, I'm actually kind of surprised that she, goes like, no, Barbie Land's not perfect either. This matriarchal system this perfect world that they built there is not fair to the Kens either. And like, Ken needs to be his own man, and all the Kens need to be their own man. And they're not just, and Ken and attached to Barbie. Like, I think that was an important thing that she didn't have to do, and I think it could have been valid not to do that and just to shit on Ken and shit on men the whole movie, and I think that would have been totally fair. But like, and I think it perfectly takes down that patriarchy, but then also goes, well, I think there's some place we need to sort of maybe not meet in the middle. Maybe let's meet a little bit. Like, we've gone so far on this side that maybe meeting in the middle isn't necessarily the right
I think we
thing,
need to
but
start again. We need
to
to
kind of
start
meet on that.
fresh.
Yes. And they even the line of being like, if the Kens can even get to the point how women are treated in our society, like, then that's a win for them. And I think that's so good. And there's so many great moments. Shout out to Michael Cera, as Ken's buddy,
Alan.
Alan. Like, every moment from Michael Cera is amazing. The monologue that America Ferrera gives at Weird Barbie's house, like, I think is fantastic. I think she is great throughout
It's
the whole
also in
movie.
plastic.
Um, yeah. Um, like all the Barbies, shout out, Kate McKinnon. I just mentioned Weird Barbie is funny. Issa Rae's great. I think having, Emma Mackey in there was going to be more of a thing of people keep saying that they look like each other, but she with brown hair versus blonde hair, you don't notice that at all. But like, the cast is so incredible. John Cena showing up as Merman Ken, like, is so funny.
Rhea Perlman
Then
as Ruth Handler.
yeah,
The scene, and this also feels very Matrix-esque in a way, because we have,
yeah.
the Kate McKinnon scene where it's like you choose which shoe, which is like choosing the pill, and then you have the scene between Rhea Perlman as Ruth Handler, the ghost of the creator of Barbie.
Just saying that out loud
It's
sounds like
very
it shouldn't
funny.
work.
No, but it does. And what's amazing about that, she's basically the Oracle, in
Yep.
the Matrix, where, they're sitting down and having a conversation in this very rustic, beautiful home that's in this corporate office after this amazing chase sequence. And for a moment, it sits still and just
Yeah.
has two actors talking to each other and having this very profound but really beautiful back and forth. And Rhea Perlman's one of those actors who's been known for, being a sitcom person for forever, on Cheers, and kind of being almost like the butt of a comedic joke, or kind of being the live wire. And here, seeing her gives just such a beautifully nuanced and thoughtful and calm and understanding performance, and being very kind and considerate to Barbie without being overly schmaltzy or sentimental, I think is really fascinating and calculated and thoughtful. And it's the same thing even with, American Ferrera and Ariana Greenblatt as the mother-daughter thing, where you have, I was having problems remembering their names, but I looked it up. So it's Gloria and Sasha. I think that is interesting, not only in terms of how one generation interprets the other, and how
Yeah.
kind of you have that divide between teen and parent, But what I was worried about, and it's completely dashed, is you're thinking there's going to be this tragic, sad subplot about the father being dead. That's not the case at all. And
No,
it's this
no, no. Yeah.
amazing joke, this
Oh my
this
God, it's
insert
so
shot
funny.
of
Yeah.
him sitting at home just
Learning
mispronouncing
Spanish. Yeah.
Spanish, which I
Yeah.
think is very funny because you think like, oh, are they going to explain why Sasha is so down or morbid because
No, they're
she
just a
lost her
regular
father?
American
No.
family, right? He's like a
Yeah.
nice guy. He's like a boring nice guy, right? Like
Yeah.
that's
But
basically
that joke is
it's like,
incredible.
yeah. Like, oh, I that landed with me perfectly. Oh my God, the Zack Snyder's Justice League joke, man. Like I cackled and I was the only person in my theater that laughed as hard as I did. Like,
Yeah.
cause like
Well,
that's
Warner
a
Brothers
very,
signing off on that is amazing.
yeah, I mean, they're the whole DCU is in shambles. So like, I mean, I'm sure they at this point they're not going to work with Zack Snyder anymore, so they don't care. But like,
Yeah.
uh, that joke is one of those very niche. It's not niche because like that's one of those bubble jokes, the film bubble jokes, right? Like I don't think, you know, the group of women who are going to see, I'm not trying to stereotype or anything. I just think that that's one of those things that you might laugh at it, but specifically Zack Snyder's Justice cut of Justice League is such like a
A broy
perfect,
thing.
yeah, broy thing that, and or a filmy thing that I think like I could tell that me laughing the hardest at that joke. I'm like, oh, that didn't land as hard for everyone else, but that was funny as hell to me. Like,
Yeah.
um, but still funny overall. But I think just me knowing that like that toxic culture is um made that joke very funny. The whole musical sequence with I'm just Ken is fantastic. I can't wait for Gosling to perform that at the Oscars. Hopefully the strike's over by then.
Well, and that's also another reference to, you know, Bob Fosse and all that jazz and how
Yeah.
that plays out. And when they're all singing in unison at the end, you know, I'm just Ken and I'm enough. You know,
Yeah.
it is very funny, but there is something sincere about that delivery. And again, that's going to Gosling's performance where he's funny, but he's also being emotionally vulnerable and open to feeling like he just is made for one thing, for one
Yeah.
purpose, you know.
Yeah.
And nobody should be or is, and watching that is incredible. And then even, you know, thinking about Megan earlier this year, one of my favorite bits in that movie was the commercial that's in the film, and
Oh
then
my
the
God. There's a
Mattel
perfect
commercial
one here
about
for
depression.
depressed Barbie.
Emotionally, I found very moving
Yeah.
because when my mom and dad were divorcing, my mom would, every time she'd pick me up from school or the babysitters, me and my brothers, the two things that she would always watch all the time was Oprah, but then she would also watch the 90s Colin Farrell BBC Pride and Prejudice
Okay.
over and
Yeah.
over again when she was going through a lot. And so
Interesting.
watching that, I was like,
That hit
man,
really hard.
that
Yeah.
yeah, and that really speaks to, I think, like finding comfort in something
Yeah.
that you love, but maybe also at the same time, you know, is because Jane Austen was, you know, ahead of her time and was also a feminist and things like, and that's just interesting as well because it's not, you think like Greta Gerwig would, you know, do a meta thing where she would add like a version of Little Women or something like that, but no, it's like the 19, I think it's 97 or 96 version of Pride, maybe it's a little bit earlier with Colin Farrell and Jennifer L. And so, you know, like just those little touches as well, I think speak so much to all generations in a lot of ways. Like even having Helen Mirren as the narrator that comes in from time to time and mentioning, you know, we understand that, you know, maybe it wasn't the best idea to cast Margot Robbie as this
When she's like,
character.
yeah, when you
You know,
want to feel this certain way about her not liking her looks or something like
yeah.
that. Yeah. But I think that's very normal too. And like, that's what I mean by this being a very feminist movie, but it's a very human movie as well. Right. And then you, like you mentioned earlier, of using a toy as this metaphor for like even growing up and starting to have thoughts about death and you're and like that's all. I'm terrified of death. It's one of my like weird anxieties I have that I fixate on. So all of that stuff, I think you yearn for the days of being, that childlike innocence where you just go about your day and everything's perfect, and you're not thinking about real life, right? You're just like, everything's great. My video games are great, as a young boy and stuff like that. But all of that, you can look at Barbie in the beginning of this, and it's not just about being human, but it's also about growing up and realizing these things. And obviously that's portrayed through America Ferrera's character projecting that onto a toy, but that's what we all do, and just representing that as this real figure, and just that idea of, as you get older, you start to realize some of these things, and that you start to get scared, or you start to notice these things on your body, or all of this stuff, I think, is very human, right? It's not just, it is very much told from a woman's perspective, but even as a 34-year-old man watching a movie about Barbies, like, I still got so much from the human experience out of all of that. And that's what I was amazed at. And like, so it handles so many different things. And then and it's just perfect, man. Like, it's as close to perfect as I'd want something like this to be. Um and that being said, I just laughed my goddamn ass off too. Like, I didn't expect to have tears in my eyes in certain moments, but just like laughing as much as I did. And it's all very clever, and nothing feels like, like any comedy, some things don't land as hard as other things. But I think more than not, like, it's hitting at like an 80 to 90% clip of like, I'm laughing consistently throughout the whole thing.
And it's so fast paced, and the
Yeah.
rhythm is there, but the rhythm also changes when, Barbie and Ken enter the real world, and as they come back into Barbie land and have to kind of work out their own problems. And I think that that's even something that could be missed on the first time around, where you're watching these characters evolve. You just mentioned how, you know, not only death, but how age changes a person. And you see that represented in, one morning you wake up and things aren't going as smoothly as they used to, or, physically you're not the same person that you were when you were in your 20s versus when
Yeah.
you're in your 30s or in your teens. And you have to make peace with that in a certain way, because the body and mind change. And you might not feel from your mind's perspective that you're any different from when you were 18 or 19, but physically you are changing. And so, like, the things that were easier for you in your younger days might not come as easy as they once did. And that is beautifully portrayed in a way where
Both
it's
that
also,
bus sequence, the sequence with Ruth Handler, like, yeah,
or
like,
when Barbie's
and
first having
Barbie's,
problems, right? Like
yeah,
when she wakes up in the morning and like the fake
totally, yeah.
shower isn't working, or when she's trying to, float off the top of her dream house and she kind of falls. Like, these things, it's like
When she's
you just
first
wake up
noticing
one
that
morning
stuff,
and you
sure,
realize you're not who you were 2 or 3
yesterday, or
years
like,
ago,
yeah. And
and
I just mean her in those two sequences specifically, and then there's that kind of montage where she's seeing like life, and which I've already mentioned before. Like, that's going back to those moments and realizing why she was feeling that way and why that's okay. And I think is so poignant and gorgeous. And then yeah, just it's just an impeccably made, fun movie that has a great message, and just is an absolute blast. So I'm gonna give the movie 5 stars. I think it's one of my favorite movies of the year. I think Greta Gerwig um is absolutely one of the best filmmakers working today. And this is coming from someone who didn't love Little Women, but and even my first watch of Lady Bird, I wasn't won over, but that was at a very uh, different experience, where I was in the middle of TIFF when I was like in a bad mood, and I saw Lady Bird and I was like, I didn't like that. Then watched Lady Bird again. I was like, no, this is great. So I can't wait to see the rest of her career and as a director. And am I excited for, some Narnia movies? Not really, but I mean, hey, I wasn't excited for Barbie either. So I'm ready for those to win me over. So, um, what a great movie.
yeah, I'm very close to giving this a 5. I just think I want to rewatch it one more time, so I'm going to give it a 4.5. But even things like the way that I think Gerwig, I think she's older than us, but the way that she brings in the early 2000s
She's
into both,
39. Yeah.
she's 39. So the way that she brings in the early 2000s into both Lady Bird and this, you know, the Dave Matthews
Oh yeah.
song Crash Into Me in Lady Bird, and how it recontextualizes the song but still kind of says it's okay to enjoy it for what it is, but you know, you should also look at the lyrics of this and things like that. There's this similar kind of conversation going on with Matchbox 20's Push, and how that's kind of played and turned into this really warped ballad by the Kens, and how Ryan Gosling delivers that. And you know, even you know, the use of a couple of bars in the score of Butterfly by Crazy, I think it's Crazy Town, yeah, where
Yeah.
that was also used in Orange County. I remember that was kind of like a big selling point off of
I
that
know we're at
soundtrack.
that part where we're gonna start hearing American Pie music and like, and I that's what I attribute to the 2000s is all those
Yeah.
songs that were in the
Well, it's all
American
new
Pie
metal,
movies.
right?
Like,
It's
yeah.
all, but it's also new metal. Like, when are we gonna get, you know, that point where, you know, Limp Bizkit is being used unironically in something, or maybe a little bit. This, they're using this ironically, but I do feel that there is going to be people that grew up with those songs that maybe have nostalgia for them where maybe we don't, because we grew
Hmm.
up in that period and maybe we did like them then. I mean, I remember liking songs by Puddle of Mud, and then you go back and you're like,
Oh,
oh, what was
totally.
I thinking?
No, I did too, man. I was the king of I love 3 Days Grace and like all of these Trapped and all these fucking bad new metal kind of bands and stuff like that. Yeah, it perfectly handles all of that stuff. Like, um I think she would be still considered a millennial, like an elder millennial, like we are too. But that's
But
why
it's
I
just
think some of
interesting that
those
that
stuff
period that she like,
hits.
that she's taking a
She's
lot of
nostalgic for,
cultural.
yeah, and like, and we'll poke fun at that kind of that era and stuff too, and all the Ken stuff later in the movie. The Casa Dojo, like what was it? Casa Dojo,
Hold on, I gotta look
whatever,
it up.
is so funny too, and like all the just his obsession with horses, random and hilarious, and
But again, that's the child logic, right?
yeah,
Like, when a child is interpreting or
what,
seeing how
yeah,
other people behave, they take those influences for better or worse, good or bad, but it's the way that they interpret them. And you don't think like, oh, I would interpret this, the patriarchy as, you know, like riding a horse,
yeah.
or having horses, or having, you know, mini fridges and, you know, giant bottles of protein powder. But like, that's what that's his version of the patriarchy. And this is another movie that deals with having a conversation about those things. And obviously I don't want to compare it because this happened in reality, but I think that this is a continued conversation in a different form to what Sarah Polly was having with women talking. You know,
Totally,
these
yeah.
isolated communities having a conversation about how the real world is versus their own world, and what's good and bad about both. And you know, that dialogue continuing in a way. So yeah, 4.5 out of 5. It's very close to a 5. I think it will be once I see it again. But this is just one of the most truly, I don't like using this word, but like, it is a special film, and it really
I
is
agree.
such a beautifully made movie. But it's also just extremely entertaining and funny and poignant. It's all these things wrapped into one product, and you're getting so much more than what this movie deserves and what Mattel deserves from Greta
Yeah.
Gerwig. So and I honestly do think now, after this weekend and after this movie, don't like saying like, oh, I have to compare her to a man or anything, but this is her entering the same level as Spielberg with Jaws or Jurassic Park. This is her, this is her big blockbuster that way. And I think from now on she will be on that Mount Rushmore of filmmakers that I think people will recognize and know moving forward,
I
if they
hope
don't
so,
already.
man. Like I know we gave that title to a couple people. Famously M. Night Shyamalan was on the cover of it. What was it, Time, or was it a
Yeah.
film magazine or something like that? But of like the next Spielberg and stuff like that. Like I really do have faith that she will be in that kind of group of filmmakers that um and I think people were cynical about this too, of her like signing on for those Narnia movies and talking about how she wants to be a big director and make big movies. But I think this should prove that she can take what made her great as a quote unquote smaller filmmaker, and inject that into these big, we need more of this. And you can tell how people are going out this weekend with Oppenheimer and Barbie being, one's based on a very famous IP. So that is kind of bending the rules a little bit, but they're not franchises, right? Like they're both original films, using the loosest term for Barbie, but like, and I think they're both, you know, I guess kind of, Nolan is very much a Nolan movie, and we're gonna get into that in 2 seconds. But they feel different than the repetitiveness we've been getting out of Hollywood in blockbusters. And this is coming from someone who loves the MCU and loves big action movies and dumb shit like that. But like both of these movies felt like something different, right? And I think we're craving something different. And you can see that in the box office. Spider-Verse, the same thing, right? Showcasing that we want something a little different. Like even if it is still a superhero movie, give us something fucking different, or like give us something with a good emotional core, or at least great animation we've never seen before. And in Nolan's case with a biopic, do it in a way we've never really seen before. And I think that's to varying degrees of success, is something we've never really seen before in a biopic. So let's get into that. Let's talk about Oppenheimer. Or what? Why do
Quickly,
you want?
Ken's
Oh,
Mojo Dojo Casa
Casa.
House is
Yeah,
the
okay.
name of it.
I
But
guess
I even
close.
think too. I don't want to, because I think I like Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning more than Oppenheimer.
Yeah,
But I think to a lesser extent, I would include that as well in this month of July, just
yeah,
because it's giving us something that we haven't gotten in such a long time, which is practical in camera stunt,
work. Yeah,
work and practical effects, which leads perfectly into Oppenheimer, which Nolan has been very adamant about this movie not using any CGI or post-production effects. And so he's very much a guy that's like Cruise in that way, where he wants to make everything as real and tangible as possible, even if it's trying to figure out a way to depict the Trinity test and the explosion of the first atomic bomb in Los Alamos. So yeah, so I think that that's an interesting kind of transition there, going from the artificial becoming reality to reality becoming morose and sort of almost depressing.
get into it, man. I'll let you kick off this one. I know we both, I think, liked the movie. I think I liked it a little bit more than you did. You had a few more problems, but like I'm gonna kick it off to you first of
Yeah.
giving your thoughts on Oppenheimer, and I'll be right back.
Yeah, so Oppenheimer is such a handsomely made production that is trying to reckon with the complications of J. Robert Oppenheimer, played by Cillian Murphy in the film, and his contributions to history, and also being known as the father of the atomic bomb, and also the horrors in which he brought into the real world, and obviously the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in particular. And so the story is a first person narrative, all from the point of view of Oppenheimer in the sequences that are shot in color. So it's the subjective versus the objective, and the black and white being the more objective, and that being more from the point of view of Robert Downey Jr.'s politician character, Louis Strauss, who is being sort of who's up for a cabinet position, and being kind of brought into that, but also having to use Oppenheimer as railroading him essentially in these hearings. And so this is during also this is after World War II, and in the McCarthy era at this point, where people are accusing other people of communism to save themselves, or to take the pressure off. And so you have this story that's about you know, World War II, the invention of something that I don't think any human being should have a responsibility for, because it is basically a threat to not only human beings but to the world itself, because there is that conversation that Matt Damon's character Leslie Groves has with Oppenheimer, that there is that slight possibility that this could destroy the world if if it goes off and it affects the atmosphere. But watching the movie, I think the Trinity test is undeniable. That sequence is perfect. And then after that, I felt a lot more goodwill towards the film, and
The last act is quite good.
that's usually not the case with Nolan movies, because Nolan movies, the common interpretation is that the third acts are usually where his movies kind of lose you a little bit. I've always felt that with like Batman Begins. I think that final sequence that takes place, on the train is where it goes a little bit off the rails, pun intended.
Batman Begins, my favorite Nolan Batman movie.
2/3 of that movie, I think, are incredible. I think once it becomes more of a superhero movie in that conventional sense, when you get into the third act of it, and this is superhero movies in general, it kind of feels like it's going through the formula at that point, where I felt like the Trinity test almost wiped the slate clean a little bit, and I was kind of enjoying it more. The thing I keep thinking about with this movie, and he doesn't listen to his own conversation between the two characters. There's a conversation between Florence Pugh's Gene Hatlock and Oppenheimer about the Communist Party, and Oppenheimer had communist leanings, although he never really officially joined, where his brother and people that he was friends with were communists. And so this woman that he's having this affair with, his quote unquote mistress, who predates his relationship with his actual wife, Kitty Oppenheimer, played by Emily Blunt, who's basically invisible in the movie. Women in Christopher Nolan movies are
Still needs to work on it.
underwritten, and that's why I can't give, like, I think anybody that declares this movie a masterpiece, I think needs to really look at that part of it, because I think without, you can argue, okay, well, it's a first person narrative, so it's all from the point of view of Oppenheimer, so you can give some room there, some wiggle room. And this is that conversation I want to talk about, because there's that conversation of wiggle room, of not completely towing the line with the political party you're with, and finding room to still also be an individual as well, that Nolan doesn't completely adhere to when he's telling this story. He's such a formalist as a filmmaker that when he's trying to let loose and be gonzo in the way that he talks about his influences being, someone like Terrence Malick, who loses himself in a scene and doesn't necessarily follow structure all the time, and kind of finds artistry and chaos and beauty within the moment and the human nature of it all. Nolan can't let go. He has such a hard time letting go of those things that when he tries, he just picks it up right away. And then the gonzo element that a lot of people are talking about with JFK, which is also very funny because Gary Oldman was in JFK and he's in this as Harry Truman. And then you also have a couple other actors like Tony Goldwyn and Jason Clarke. Goldwyn was in Nixon, and Clark was in Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps. You have these moments where it's supposed to kind of be almost erratic, or in Robert Downey Jr. as well, it being in Natural Born Killers, where you have moments where everything is supposed to kind of be all over the place, and the subjective and the objective are bleeding into each other, and it's kind of playing in that Memento territory where we're seeing the present day scenes of Guy Pearce's character, but then the reflections of Sammy Jenkins in the past.
Always got to remember Sammy Jenkins, man.
Yeah, and I think that is not always successful when it comes to his narrative structure, that he truly can't let go and kind of show the kind of frantic process in a way that feels like those movies. And even though he's trying to do that, it doesn't always work. I also do feel that some of the editing becomes a little bit tedious in the way that we're watching Michael Bay films, where the cuts feel like they don't hold for longer than 3 to 5 seconds.
I noticed that too. And
there's a line of dialogue that I think is truly awful, which is a guy that works, I believe, at Princeton, that's kind of helping him get representation in terms of legal representation. That's where Macon Blair's character comes in, and he says like, oh, he's telling you exactly what is going on. There's no subtext. It's like you're up against, it's a kangaroo court. You're up against everything.
I can't believe we haven't brought this up, but maximalism, man. Like both of these movies are maximalist films, I think. And like
to a degree, I still think that formalism of Nolan is holding it back, and it's not as maximalist as you think it is. I totally get why Paul Schrader loves this movie, because a lot of the film is a man in a room giving his testimony to
defending himself
as a patriot, as an American, but also still being critical of America as a whole.
Yeah.
In a time where, again, the Red Scare and McCarthyism and communism, and people were being arrested or having to flee the country because of those things. But Nolan he can't write outside the lines. He has to be in complete and utter dominance of everything. And when you're watching those scenes where he's starting to be like, okay, I'm gonna no, I'm gonna hold on. No, I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna let go.
And what do you mean by that? Sorry, like what you
no. So there'll be moments where, especially in the third act, but throughout, where you have the depression and psychology of the character and the timelines bleeding in or crossing into each other, and it feels like it's trying to go for something chaotic, in terms of how we're seeing that frantic gonzo pacing of anything could happen. It doesn't feel real anymore, but it is, and there's something like, it's almost like the character's on a drug, and everything is not as lucid as it once was at the beginning of the story, in the way that, you're being sleep deprived or delirious. But Nolan can't completely let go of his own structure. And he's one of those guys that, he's not Oliver Stone. He's not Terrence Malick. He's not somebody that can just simply say, let's find out what happens in this scene. Let's let things play out.
The auteur in him gets in his way. You're saying, of that objective, subjective, black and white means this, color means this. I've done this in my other films. I play with time in this certain way. I do this like that. His formality, I guess, is what you were saying.
Yes.
It kind of gets in his own way a little bit.
But there are still things I really like about the movie, and I'll let you talk now, because like I think you do have a much more positive take on it. But there are things throughout that I do like that are subtle. But again, yes, I think the formalism of Nolan's filmmaking sometimes gets in his way. I think the women are horribly written. I think there are some clunky lines of dialogue. Cillian Murphy as well, I think, is good in the movie, but there is something about his performance that, part of it is he is an audience surrogate in a way, or a conduit to this story, but there are moments where he does kind of feel like a non-entity. And I think like I was more gravitating towards some of the people around him.
Yeah, he ends up being like a project manager, right? And then like I know he is the figurehead, and he is the guy who maybe is that guy who took the heat for all of it, or took the metal for all of it. But I agree with you. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. But I don't know, like I feel like that auteur nature to Nolan's movies and that formula he's stuck by is one of the reasons I guess I like him as a filmmaker. And we've talked about this earlier in the show, where we both kind of got soft on Nolan. What am I trying to say?
They're going to say we softened on him as a director, as the savior of cinema, because of Tenet,
I think
because of his behavior.
We were both in the middle of that film bro era of love The Dark Knight. Nolan was the fucking guy in film school. He only had at that point, up to The Dark Knight, his filmography wasn't even very large at that point. And I convinced the head of the film department to let me do my like basically my little thesis thing on Nolan's filmography, even though he didn't have enough movies, right? Where everyone was picking Scorsese, Tarantino, the classic film broy kind of stuff. I went for the newer film broy thing of Nolan. Have I frozen on your end or no?
Yes, you have. You
All
have
right,
frozen.
great.
You look great
I
though.
look great. Hopefully I come back, and I don't know if it's still recording my video, but I'll keep going.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, you're back.
there I'm back. So I did my filmography big giant essay on Nolan. So I was, I was just like everyone, is 100% in. And then as I've gotten older and as his movies come out, I kind of softened on him a little bit, and especially with Tenet and the whole pandemic, which I'm repeating myself. But um I don't know. Like I'm not as high on the movie as some people. I'm closer to you than I am, the people calling it a masterpiece. I still really uh I really do think the movie is quite good, and it did kind of win me back a little bit. And I am someone who kind of likes the formulaic nature of certain filmmakers. Like I not necessarily 100% bought into auteur theories and things like that but I do like that. Like I am someone who likes a stamp on a movie, right? Like I like when someone goes, these are my movies, this is how I make them, and you're going to find that kind of stuff in all of my movies. Like when you immediately sit down to watch a Chris Nolan movie, like it's a Chris Nolan movie from how it's the setup of it, uh the structure
Non-linear
of it,
storytelling. Yeah.
non-linear storytelling, even bringing back the Memento subjective objective thing, actors he's used, like all those classic auteur things. Like I don't know. I think that's kind of what won me back in this a little bit. So I kind of have an opposite feeling to you, where I agree with you on the editing standpoint, where there are certain sequences where it's just two characters talking, and I'm like, can you just let it fucking sit on someone for a second? Like, I get that you want this kinetic energy, and that's one thing I do love about Nolan movies as well, is like he can make grass growing feel intense, right? Like, or paint drying feel intense, because there is this relentless, like tick, 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 like crescendo operatic nature to his movies that are constantly building to its finale. That is another thing that is formulaic in his movies, where they always, as they've gotten on, have even though he's brought in different cinematographers and different composers, like even bringing in Ludwig Göransson and having Hoyt van Hoytema come in his last group of movies. Like they still feel like his early stuff, because you can very much tell that he is in total control of everything, right? For better and for worse. But like for me, it's just like overall, like Tenet was such a convoluted fucking mess, which is like something we've discussed, that I'm fine with movies like Interstellar or other things where you've kind of, the first time you watch them, you're like, oh, that was a lot. Like, I don't know if I liked it, but I might need to see it again. And then the more you watch it, the more you enjoy it. I don't think that means a movie should take 6 times before you actually grasp what it is and go, oh, now I get it. It's like, no, then like, no, sure, you're
You just don't
rewarding
like
those
it, which is
people.
okay too.
Yeah. Like maybe if I watch Tenet 10 times, maybe I'm going to finally understand what the hell it was, right? But even the action in that movie and just the setup. Anyways, getting back to this, like I do think it is that greatest hits kind of Nolan movie, which is why I think people are calling it a masterpiece, and why people are kind of really in love with it. And I think I'm close to that, but I'm closer to you, where I still think it is very good. And I like that it's that greatest hits of going back to, the structure of Memento, but then taking in what the time and different things of Dunkirk, and then adding in, some of the IMAX cinematography that he utilized in Dark Knight and Interstellar and things like that. And it's just like, it does feel like this pinnacle of everything he's been doing, and then using actors that he's used for better, for worse in other movies, and all of that stuff. So like, I really felt completely engrossed by it the entire time. And this is coming from someone who, I know he's an important figure, Oppenheimer. I know the history of the Manhattan Project to an extent, but I'm not a period piece guy. I care nothing about American history at all. So like those are two things that this movie had against it. And I felt this similar way of Dunkirk, where war movies, I enjoy more than just, American history movies or anything like that. But like Dunkirk, a movie that I didn't care about the first time, but the more I watched it, the more I enjoyed it, basically because of its structure and its relentless pacing and how it utilizes time.
And you saw
Um,
it at TIFF Cinesphere as well
that's when I
during the
started. I
festival.
saw
Yes.
that movie 2 or 3 times in theaters, and it got better each time. This movie, I did feel engrossed and engaged the entire time. I think its structure does get in its way a little bit, both from just a being. This is just a Nolan problem sometimes of making something more convoluted than it actually is, just because of his structure. In like, I'm like, this should be easier to follow, and maybe if I was American and knew the history a little bit more. I'm just not a American history person. I know this is a very important thing that happened, and it is a changed the world because of what it created. I know the simplest amount of history on it. So like I should be able to follow it pretty easily, but like I found myself going, there's so many fucking people in this movie
Oh,
that
you said it
it's like,
perfectly. Where it's like, if you're not a white guy in this movie, middle-aged
then
white guy.
fire your agent. Like really fire your agent. If you were a middle-aged white dude in Hollywood and you didn't get a call to be in this movie, I'd be like, what the fuck happened? Why didn't I get a call? I'm like literally the people in this movie, you're just like, for 1 or 2 scenes is distracting, but almost becomes like, it shouldn't be. Nothing in this movie should be comical, but like
But it is
it
comical
is
when you see Matthew Modine in like 2
oh yeah, I
scenes, in one
kept
of which he says nothing.
yeah, papa. So like I just Nevis and I kept leaning over to her and we were doing this like bit, and I shouldn't have been doing a bit during this movie, and I think that's sort of telling at moments of being like and anytime a new cameo would pop in, we'd like lean over and like say a movie or show that they were in, and it got dumber and dumber as it went along. But I don't know. There was just something about it where I liked it more as it went along, just like you. Where I guess it's usually, I'm with you, where it's kind of the opposite in Nolan movies. But I felt like at the beginning, I'm like, holy fuck, there's a lot going on, and it's jumping around so much, and but its relentless pacing keeps you kind of fully engrossed in it. And I think the score is amazing. The IMAX cinematography, which I talked about earlier, um, you know, that jumping back and forth, I think even hurt that editing even more, Eric, to your point. Like, I think you'd
Yeah.
be even more distracted or more annoyed with it when it's cutting not only in a scene. I leaned over to Nevis and it said it reminded me of Bohemian Rhapsody a little bit, which is not a good compliment in the sense of like the most editing, because it's just it doesn't know how to sit on something. And I think it's doing that intentionally because it wants that relentless pace, because it is a lot of people talking in a courtroom, or not a courtroom. What is it?
A hearing.
A
It's a cabinet
yeah.
hearing. Yeah.
Cabinet hearing, as well as a boardroom, as well as in, a building, and stuff like that. Like, it's a lot of just men talking to each other. So you have to kind of do that kind of stuff to keep people's like eyes open almost, right? And then
And that's some of the problems where the Nolanisms come in, right? Like, he
yeah,
can't, in a 3-hour movie, you're going to get it, but he can't help himself
yeah,
sometimes. And like those little, and we should also quickly mention, I really like Jennifer Lame as an editor. I think she's done some really good
yeah,
stuff. She edited Ari Aster's Hereditary. Speaking of Noah Baumbach, Marriage Story. So it's not like she's coming in and she's serving the director's vision, and she did that with Tenet as well. So it's Nolan telling, like, what he wants, and she's doing it to the best of her abilities. But if I had only seen these movies, I would be like, oh man, I really wish like Lee Smith would come back and edit his films or things like that. But she has done some excellent work in the past. It's just Nolan's style can be so abrasive at times, with that kind of heightened, hyperkinetic, bombastic energy, that it almost becomes parody onto itself. And that's where I have a problem with, where he is a guy that I think is super talented, is an amazing technician, maybe not the greatest writer in the world. He's very similar to James Cameron in that way, but there is something about him that we're just like, he is his own worst enemy. Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you on that. But overall, I found myself, I think it did help that I thought it got better as it went along. I think uh, that sequence of the test is amazing. The Trinity test is amazing. I think the last act, when it starts to get more into the repercussions of everything, I think is quite good. So I think it kind of leaves you in a spot that's devastating, and but weirdly I felt more emotion in Barbie than I did during this movie. Like I do feel like Nolan's, like, he's not great at invoking emotion. And I do think in Interstellar, that's when he tried the hardest to do that. And, you know, it works to varying degrees of success, but like, I didn't have that, like, um, existential, you know, crisis feeling like at the end of this movie, like I felt during Barbie at times, right? Or like any emotion I felt during, and I never thought I'd say that, but like people were talking about the movie being devastating, and at the end you have to recover from it, and it is a lot. It is heavy. It's a lot, and it's 3 hours. It's exhausting. Um, I just never felt that, although I was fully engaged and interested, and I thought it was a really well made movie. I just never felt that by the end of it. And then quickly, I'll throw it back over to you. But um, we made the joke about if you're a middle aged white dude and you weren't in this movie, fire your agent. But I
Nick
do
Cage
think,
at home. Why am I not in this
yeah,
movie?
I do think there are some great performances here, and I think we're on the same page. On this, I think David Krumholtz is great in the movie.
That's where
Um,
the emotion is the closest thing to
yeah,
feeling something. The way that he and his relationship to Oppenheimer is actually closer to being a real brother or a family member than his own family, and the way
yeah,
that Krumholtz's character, will offer him an orange and say you need to eat, like, and
yeah.
sits with him and is very kind. That's where I found there was a beacon of human emotion to care about somebody in that way. And he looks like Alfred Molina, and it's
He
hard
does.
not
I
to think,
thought Wayne Knight at times too, like a younger Wayne Knight, when and Alfred Molina is a great pull as well.
yeah.
But there are a couple things, and Macon Blair I think is quite good as well.
Also
Um
compassionate in the way
it-
that, like, he'll sit down next to Oppenheimer after that one moment where they realize, like, they're in an uphill battle, and they're sitting in that kind of like chair that's off to the side or the background or that couch, and he's just sitting next to him, and he's like, yeah, I've never experienced this either. And he's not saying that,
yeah.
but he's conveying that. And it's
Yeah,
also just
and
nice to see him not play a
Macon Blair, I
scumbag.
love. Yeah, I know, I love it, man. Right when I saw him, I was like, Macon Blair, fuck yeah, dude! Like you're in a like front and center in a Nolan movie, like in a big sequence. I was like, and again, who isn't in this movie? But like,
Yeah.
I just love seeing Macon Blair, a guy that I discovered through Jeremy Saulnier and Blue Ruin, and I interviewed that guy back at TIFF in
Making
2013.
bacon, baby.
And
He's
yeah,
making
and
that bacon.
super nice guy, and like he's great in Blue Ruin and all of Jeremy's stuff. So like go check out Blue Ruin if you have a chance, because like
Well, even in
um
Green Room, right? Like,
the
he's
Green Room
amazing
is
in that.
great too, but I just mean being the lead in Blue Ruin, and he's so good. I thought both of them were standouts of the supporting cast. I mean, Downey Jr. I think is really really good as well. Um, uh, the best I've seen him in a long time. I'm with you with Cillian Murphy. I thought he carries the movie. Um, he carries the movie, but like I was never blown away with him, but maybe it felt effortless. Like he is a great actor, and I'm glad to see him again front and center in a Nolan movie. People were tweeting like, I can't believe no one's uh done this before and made him a lead. I'm like, has no one? Danny Boyle did this like 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, with
Like,
Sunshine and
yeah.
28 Days Later,
Yeah,
right?
I'm like, you got Cillian Murphy Bush at the beginning of 28 Days Later, and then it's
And Neil
just
Jordan's Breakfast on Pluto. Like, he's
yeah,
been the lead, but I
I
guess
know.
maybe they're looking at it from the point of view,
A big
I-
movie like this, I guess,
studio
like, yeah.
films, right? You know?
I will say I agree with you with Nolan still has a lot of work when it comes to women in his films, and just a woman's perspective in anything of get even though the not necessarily like he's sticking to he's a middle-aged white guy, so he's making movies about middle-aged white guys,
Finally,
and
those guys
for yeah, I
get a
get there.
break.
But like he keeps trying, and I guess with this I thought, I guess the Anne Hathaway stuff in Interstellar, and sorry, not just Anne Hathaway and Jessica Chastain in Interstellar, I think is the closest he's gotten to.
But Chastain's character was
is
originally written as a
no,
man.
yeah, great. So I think here you have Florence Pugh is one of the best working actresses in Hollywood, and she's doing her best with what she's given. It's just she's not given much. And then you have Emily Blunt, who is also giving a performance that I think at one moment is quite good, and the rest of it is not so great. Not necessarily thinking it's her fault, but again, with what she's given,
Some
and
bad drunk acting. Let's
yeah,
just say that.
I agree. It's hard
And
to
Blunt
play
is one of the
drunk and-
best. Like,
yeah.
she's amazing, and it just feels like, yeah, the one scene that she kind of where she hands Jason Clarke, his papers basically. And it's like, you are a piece of shit, and I will
Is
and I
great.
will take you on in your own arena, is amazing. And it's like the rest of it, she's literally the suffering spouse, and she's barely there.
Yeah.
And again, you can argue, well, okay, it is a first person narrative, and Oppenheimer was so much more focused on his teachings and his work, and that's how it is. But then with the Florence Pugh thing, like, this has been brought up a lot recently as well, that Pugh's character, the way that she's written in this story, is very similar to the way that Marion Cotillard's character is written in Inception, where you have a character who dies and becomes kind of a way to motivate the lead man to push through and continue on, or as
It's
a
the laziest
roadblock
way to
for him,
use
as a
woman
guilt,
in
a form of guilt.
in a
Yeah.
movie. Yeah, I agree. And so yeah, it doesn't handle that stuff
Even the
super
sex
well.
scene, the way that again, let's talk about that Oliver Stone kind of like showing a
The surreal
provocative
moments, or
image where
yeah.
you see them having sex on the chair in the boardroom.
I like that moment, but like
I think it's kind of silly.
yeah,
I found
I
it to be a
understand
little
that.
goofy. I quickly want to.
It was jarring, but
Yeah.
I will say, like, I do like some of those more surreal moments. Although it, again, going back to a greatest hits of Nolan, the scarecrow ass fucking jittery thing in the background. I'm like, how do you not think of that watching
Yeah.
this because of it's Cillian Murphy? Yeah.
Or even the sound of the train, right? Like that freight train that's about to like crash. That sound of it. But yeah, when you're going through the cast, it is very distracting. It's great to see that Nolan has his own Ken doll in the form of Kenneth Branagh, even though Branagh I don't think is that great.
No
in this
Michael
movie.
Caine at all.
Well,
right?
Mike, I honestly think Tenet's going to be his last movie, unless there's like a voice like in the way that Dunkirk.
I thought there might have been something there, but I haven't heard anything.
But someone did mention once, and I'm sorry that I can't remember who it was, but it was on Twitter, that almost the way that John David Washington says goodbye to Michael Caine's character in the scene in Tenet is Nolan saying goodbye to him, and that this is going to be the last time you see him on screen together, because Michael Caine's in his 90s now, and Michael Caine's been very open about like his abilities as an actor.
Yeah.
He's basically semi-retired at this point. He can't walk as much as he used to and things like that. But going back to like this cast, like there are moments where, and this isn't going to be for everybody, obviously, like there's moments where you're watching the hearings and you see, that group of people interrogating Downey Jr.'s Louis Strauss character, and you see someone like Harry Groener, who's probably best known to a lot of people for playing the evil mayor in Buffy the Vampire Slayer in the 3rd season. He was the big bad on that. He was a big deal on that show.
I don't doubt it. I just think that's such a funny pull.
But the funny thing there is that he was also in A Cure for Wellness. He's the guy that Dane DeHaan is going to that is going to, who's also looking like Tim Robbins in this movie, who's going to that resort to find. And so like you're thinking about that, so you're being taken out of that. Josh Hartnett's in this film. Josh Hartnett, who actually is very good in the movie.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah,
there's the scene where they're all talking about what part of Japan they're going to bomb, and James Remar, who's best known as Harry and Dexter nowadays, but it's also a Walter Hill actor.
Everyone
is the one that
all
says
your favorites.
all your favorites are here. Is the one that says I don't want it to be Kyoto because
I vacation there.
Vacation there. But they mention the reason why they still want to bomb Japan after the war is ending, or Germany is kind of collapsing at this point, is because of Pearl Harbor. And Josh Hartnett being in Michael Bay's Pearl Harbor, you're like, oh, it's kind of, like it's not his fault, but it is like if you have seen those movies, you kind of associate certain things, and you're just like, oh, that for a moment there, it's like, and they cut to Hartnett when he's sitting there on the couch with Oppenheimer when they say Pearl Harbor. So it's
Yeah,
kind of
I
like,
don't know. I never
I
really.
think that I'm not saying that that's a negative per se. I'm just saying if you are aware of these things, they do kind of take you out a little bit more. But there are elements that I do like in the film. I really think the way that Downey is portrayed here as a thin-skinned weasel,
Yeah.
very sensitive, is fantastic. And there are little moments where anytime someone pronounces his name wrong, which is something in the movie, they say Strauss instead of Strauss. There will be certain times where Nolan will cut to a close-up or a medium shot of him, especially during that Senate hearing or that cabinet hearing, where he'll wince,
Yeah.
or like, and that I think is really interesting. Or you mentioned, him being the program director at the Los Alamos base for the Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
There's a conversation earlier on about how, people who are extremely smart or high functioning wouldn't necessarily be good in kind of um menial jobs. And so like there's a conversation where like, Oppenheimer even admits, I think it was to Josh Hartnett as well, where he would never be good at running a burger stand or a burger place.
Yeah.
But he's running this,
Yep.
multifaceted facility that is, that has so much riding on it. So he can do that, but he can't do something that's very kind of simplistic
Yeah.
in comparison. So those things I really
Which is
enjoyed
true.
quite
I
a
think if you
bit.
took any CEO and told them to run a Starbucks, like I don't think you're gonna.
Oh, they'd run it into the
Yeah.
ground before the
Yeah.
end of the day. Um, I also think that like the sequence with Casey Affleck's character is really well done, because the way it's like they talk about this guy who is an extremist and someone that shouldn't have power but does, sniffing out communists, and Matt Damon's character saying, and Matt Damon's very good in this movie too, saying,
Yeah, there's a couple
you
moments
shouldn't
from him I
you
didn't
shouldn't you
love,
shouldn't
but I
know
thought.
him. He should only know you. Like, you shouldn't
Yeah.
be in the same room with Casey Affleck's character. And I'm not advocating for Casey Affleck,
Yeah,
but
I was gonna. It's
his character I think is interesting, in where that is kind of bringing up the communist aspect of the story, where there are people like red-blooded true Americans that are in power, that if they even suspect anything, you will be in trouble. And even if you have somebody like a Groves on your side, who isn't always on Oppenheimer's side, like the whole story of him getting clearance is a whole other thing as well, which I think is really fascinating, where it's like you're giving this guy a certain amount of access,
yeah.
but you're not giving him everything because of those political leanings or past associations with other people.
Yeah.
um there's another thing as well, where there's a Nolanism that I find kind of interesting, that's in Batman Begins and in this as well, where in Batman Begins you have Rucker Hauer's character taking over Wayne Enterprise and firing Lucius Fox in one moment, and he says, didn't you get the memo? And then at the end of that movie you have the reverse of that. In this, I can't remember the line, but there's a thing between Strauss and his aide, played by Alden Ehrenreich, where at the
I
end
liked
of it,
Alden Ehrenreich in this too.
yeah, he was good. He was good,
Not
but
much
there's
to
a
do, but
no, but nobody really has a whole lot to do outside of the bigger players. But then Ehrenreich at the end of it, when like you find out that he didn't get the position, Downey Jr.'s character didn't get the position, repeats the same line basically, as like it's blowing up in your
Yeah.
face now, and so
Yeah.
there's a lot of those writing isms that are there, and I do kind of miss when Jonathan was writing with Christopher, because even
Yeah.
though Jonathan's a more conventional sort of accessible, using the word
Yeah.
accessible here, I think they complemented each other pretty well. And the Nolans kind of worked well with both the cerebral and kind of the commercial, and kind of combining those two things,
Mhm.
where sometimes Nolan's own pretensions and his habits, for better or worse, we've mentioned that a lot in this episode, the things that are for better or worse, tend to really, you're getting Nolan uncut here. If you want a true Christopher Nolan movie, you're getting it. And I will take this any day over the week over something like The King's Speech or any
Oh,
stuffy
absolutely, man.
biopic.
That's why I think I'm kind of just on the positive end of just like I appreciate he's doing his thing, and I do attribute it to maximalism in both of these movies to an extent, even though it's like Nolan is in a different category almost on his own. And again, for better or for worse, but I will still take this, and again, it might take a couple watches to kind of, you know, maybe appreciate it a little bit more, or kind of like understand exactly what he's doing with the objective subjective and the time, the nonlinear storytelling. Like I think that is one of the for worse of the better or for worse kind of things of like his movies do, because of their structures, like sometimes you just don't always grasp them completely on first watch, which I do think is a little bit of an issue, but then it does reward you for going back and watching his movies again. So yeah, ultimately, like I like the surreal stuff. Like I liked the kind of, that's the where the editing I did like, of inserting the fucking like the like atoms and bombs and things, and like um when the not hallucinations, with the visions and stuff like that. Like I liked some of that, again, for better or for worse. Some of it doesn't work, some of it does. So like um I just appreciate him as a whole, of like there's any filmmaker that has their definitive like fucking like this is a movie from me, I just I appreciate, because you're not going to get any that anywhere else. You'll get people maybe trying to imitate certain, you know, there's going to be people who are influenced by Christopher Nolan now, right? Like he's been working long enough that we're going to start to see, and I think we already are seeing that
Well,
in
The
certain
Father, look
cases.
at
And
the
like
Anthony Hopkins movie, right?
yeah, like, and I think even Jordan Peele to an extent, like I think is in that camp of Spielberg very much, but like even more on a more modern sense, like of no, like Nope to me, with the IMAX cinematography and stuff like that, did feel like it was a little bit Christopher Nolan. And um I just think, though, you're not going to get anyone who's making a movie exactly like this. Like no one's going to make an Oppenheimer movie that was exactly like this, and I do appreciate that. And I did think it was fully engaging, and for a 3-hour movie, its pacing is relentless, and I think it gets better as it goes on. So I'm teetering between two ratings here, and I've gone back and forth since I saw it, and because I loved Barbie so much. Right now, I'm going to give the movie a 4, but I could go as high as a 4.5. Like I really do think it's quite good. And I think that's just a testament to him as a filmmaker too. Like this has won me kind of back over, and but in my Nolan personal rankings, I still think I like Inception more. I like 2 out of the 3 Batman movies more. Um I like Dunkirk more. I like Interstellar more. So like when people are saying this is his best film, like I don't see that. I just find those
Or
movies
when they're
are,
saying like his best film in a long time, Dunkirk was 2017. It
and
wasn't that long
got
ago.
nominated for best picture and was
And
excellent.
directing.
Yeah.
It was his first directing Oscar nomination.
Yeah. So anyways, I think it's quite good. I'm gonna land on a 4 now, but I think on rewatches it could go up to a 4.5.
Yeah, I again, mixed positive. There's a lot there to appreciate and contemplate, and even though it doesn't always work with the objective subjective narratives, I do appreciate that it's challenging for a mainstream release, that he's doing something like that where most movies spoon feed you. So I'll always take something that doesn't necessarily work or even does come off as pretentious, than something that just tells you exactly how to feel. But then there are moments where, like, even the Albert Einstein stuff, like right after that kangaroo court line, and that guy gets in the car and drives away, and then you see Albert Einstein walk towards Oppenheimer, it almost weirdly feels unintentionally funny, or like it's like a sitcom moment where it's like, oh, Einstein's coming over to visit. But then I also kind of like the idea of, even though again it doesn't always work, where you're seeing the same scene play out, but from either in color or in black and white, and how the perspective changes or how scenes are interpreted, based on the person who you're seeing the point of view from. And I think, like, even though it doesn't always work, I think the idea of that is interesting. So like there's a lot there to appreciate, even if it's not his best movie. And even though this is a joke, like, it feels like Dunkirk worked for him partly because it's sparsely written and there are no women, and that's his greatest strengths as a director. Like, he's a technician
Limit the
first.
dialogue and limit.
Well, he's a
Yeah.
technician first and
Oh,
foremost.
I
He's
agree.
not an actor's director per se. He can hire great actors to be in great roles, but he's not a guy that's like focusing on performance first. He's focusing on the construction of
Yeah.
a set piece, or how
He's a
something is going to
technical
play.
master. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and those are things to really appreciate, and I think there's a lot to appreciate there, but it's not his best work in my opinion. It's a good 3.5 out of 5 that I think going down the line, if I rewatch it, I will appreciate it more. But for everything that I've seen of his, like, I will take Dunkirk, I will take The Dark Knight, I will take Interstellar, over even Memento. Like, I
I
think
love
those
Memento,
movies
yeah.
are better films. But there is a lot worth seeing here, and this is 10 times better than most blockbusters. Like, I'll take this over Oppenheimer. I'll take this over Indiana Jones. I'll take this over Transformers. Anything that
Well,
we've
of
seen
course,
in the
yeah.
anything we saw in June. I'll take that. Like, at least I'm thinking about this movie.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, thank you. This was a blast to do. I think doing both of these reviews together was something kind of unique, as much like the experience this weekend has been very unique and something that we haven't gotten in a long time. So whether you stuck around for just Oppenheimer or watched Barbie as well in the whole 2 hour kind of podcast we just did, we appreciate it. Let us know in the comments or tweet at us what you guys did first, which movie you liked more, if you liked both, if you liked one. Very curious to see how people react to both of these films. This was a blast. Eric will be back soon with some reviews for things like Gran Turismo, Strays. What else do we got coming up? Because August is kind of quiet, and with the strikes going on, the rest of the year might be
How
very
dare you,
interesting.
sir?
Um,
TMNT.
oh my god, I'm so excited. That's next
Mutant
week.
Mayhem.
Yeah, I always forget. I got a little we had for our Barbenheimer double feature, we both got kids combos at the movies to watch Oppenheimer. So Nevis had the Barbie kids combo and I had the TMNT kids combo. I really wish they did an Oppenheimer one so you could choose
It's probably
which
best
one.
they didn't, just to be.
I
Oh,
know.
that is one thing that we did we talk about it, where, I think we did, where you never see the Japanese perspective. I
We
think
didn't
that's
really
really,
mention that, but yeah.
that is important, because it's all from, again, first perspective, and I
Yeah.
think it's more, you need to focus it on the American side of things, because it's
Yeah.
talking about
I
how
agree.
corrupt and awful nationalism is, right? And that
Yeah.
patriotic aspect of, like, what is
I don't
the
know if
dark
Nolan
side of
had anything
America.
to add to show any of that, right? Like, it's not
Yeah.
necessarily his place on that part of it. I agree with that. So anyways, I had and my little topper I got weird segue.
Going from the
I
bombing
know,
to
I know. That's why I said weird
concessions.
bad segue, because Nevis got the Barbie combo, I got Ninja Turtles, and I got Raphael, which I felt was very fitting because he's the darkest of the Ninja Turtles, and it was a dark movie.
Yeah.
So
The Dark Knight of the Ninja Turtles, if you will.
Anyways, thank you everyone. We really do appreciate it. As always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck, or Ken, and you can follow all of my work around the internet, mostly at untitledmoviepodcast.com, and you can follow me on all of those social medias, including Threads, which I don't really use that often. I'm still
You got Blue Sky now too, man.
yeah, I know. I'm Blue Sky. I'm never gonna go on Blue Sky. I'm gonna be honest. Blue Sky's dead on arrival. I'm just gonna announce that here. Threads is hanging on by a thread, really. Like, unless they fucking get a desktop website that I can go on and fix some of the other things. Like, I'm a Twitter boy through and through, and I'm not trying to support the person who owns Twitter. I've just got so much invested there that's mostly where I do my posting. So at Matt Rohrbeck for all that stuff.
And I'm Eric Marchin. You can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at EM6211. And please, if you have the time, write a review on Apple
Podcasts,
I was going to say
Spotify.
iTunes again.
I caught you. And head over to Letterboxd, which is untitled_. movies. Until next time.
I wanna push you around, cause I
I
will,
will,
cause
cause I
will.
will.
I wanna take you for granted.
Life is plastic. It's fantastic. Bye, everyone.